He's it across. Matthews shoots. Great glove save by Forsberg, and Matthews can't believe that didn't find it.
You're listening to All the Kings Men.
Here in the third period if they want a chance at getting back into this.
Now in front, Tarasenko. What a save by Forsberg on Tarasenko. His best tonight.
Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back, Kings fans. I am Jesse Cohen. This is All the Kings Men. We're continuing to look at the new players added to the Kings organization this summer via draft and free agency, and today we're talking about Anton Forsberg. We're also going to be taking a closer look at how scouting is handled professionally, professional scouting, not amateur scouting, particularly when it comes to goaltending. Goaltending is one of those subjects that I'm afraid no matter how much time I spend to be talking to people about it, thinking about it, reading about it, I'm just never going to feel confident that I truly understand it. I get the sense that a lot of other people feel that way as well in the industry. People say goaltending is voodoo. That's the cliche. So fortunately, there are always people who truly love the position that are patient and willing to hold our hands as we try and wrap our heads around it. And today that person is Matt Millar. For joining me now, goaltending scout for the LA Kings, Matt Millar. How are you doing today, Matt?
Jesse.
We're here to talk about Anton Forsberg, who has been acquired presumably to be the backup goaltender for the LA Kings. Yeah.
Yeah, with the season that Darcy had in his track record, you'd foresee him being the man for here on out.
So I guess the first question I have, it's not necessarily about Anton Forsberg specifically, but it couldn't relate to him in this conversation. How do you determine, a goalie? Are there skill sets, or is there a threshold that a goalie has to reach or can reach that makes them a starter versus a backup? Or is it just, well, we have X amount of goalies and they rank in this order, and so number one's the starter for this team, and number two is the backup, and number three is the starter in the affiliate team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I think it varies by organization. Obviously, with what we have right now, it's based off of performance, and the performance that Darcy's had in the past and Darcy's currently having would lend him to being that G1 position. I think with a guy like Anton, that's performance again. He's proven to be a very steady NHL goaltender. He's done a great job in a couple of different spots coming in and taking over when the starting goalie's been injured or sick or just like Allmark was out for a bit this year, and he and Levi Marilainen stepped in and did a fantastic job to keep them in contention. So that's kind of that piece of it is that the performance piece, and I think the other part of it is the potential. Like you have a lot of some younger goalies that are coming along, like Eric Portillo, Hampton, and Carter. The potential's there. You see the skill set they have. It kind of there's some parallels that they have to a lot of other good goalies that are playing in the NHL. But that potential also has to be met with some development and obviously opportunity. And I think that's where at the NHL level you have that blend of potential and opportunity, and then the goaltender steps in and performs. And obviously they've got to play well at the NHL level. You have to win. And you've seen some goalies step in and do a great job and take over and become starting goalies, and other guys that have had a lot of potential get that opportunity and not be able to perform. So I think those are the kind of the three factors you're looking at when a guy steps in and is a starting goalie and he is performing, or a guy that's coming along and has the potential. He has that opportunity to step in and show what he's capable of doing and does it.
If I'm a fan and I'm watching the team, I can hear the general manager speak to the media and say, listen, we feel that the team needs to get, more uncomfortable, and we want to add more, I don't think Rob Blake said this 2 years ago, but when he made his speech about being uncomfortable, but the implication was that they want to get, toughness and grit and sandpaper and whatever, and they go out and they acquire those things. And then this summer, obviously there was a mandate to add size. They did that. When it comes to goaltending, can it be as simple as like, well, the team plays this style, so we need a goalie whose play style meshes well with the team's play style? Or is it as simple as we've heard from, executives over the years, where it's like, I don't understand goaltending. If they stop the puck, they're good. If they don't, they're bad. So let's just go and get a bunch of goalies and we won't worry about how their play style meshes with the team's play style.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a little bit of that is, the team's play style. Mike Buckley and his coaching style and then talking to Bill Ranford and looking at the goaltending chain. And I think if you look at number one, that's solidified. Number three, that's solidified with Copley, and then you need that number two guy that can come in and bridge that gap. And if Kemps needs a night where he needs some recovery, or Kemps, injuries do happen. If that does happen, we're really confident with Anton's track record to come in and play, for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it may be. And Cops has also proven that he can do that as well. A couple of years ago, stepping in and winning 20 games and really helping the Kings solidify their playoff hopes that season. So I think what you're looking at is, for our organization, is you're looking at the depth, and we're in a position where we have to win, and every point matters. And you look at the other teams that are in our division, in our conference, like they got really good, and we want to make sure that we, G1, G2, G3 right now, we have guys that can step in and help our team win. We want to be in a position of strength where no matter who steps in, we feel confident they can help us win an NHL game, because all those points matter. And as you've seen, last year, Ritter, pardon me, 2 years ago, Ritter had a really good season, and David Rich, pardon me, and he played very well and gave our team critical points down the stretch. Did that happen this year? Probably is not as much as it did last year. So I think that opened the door for conversations to, how do we strengthen that position? How do we give, Kemps maybe a little more, some more maintenance nights? Is there another guy out there that we feel like we can lean on and maybe play, another, 10, 15, 20 games in there that we feel really comfortable that he's going to help us win hockey games? And I think, Anton kept coming up as a guy that we watched, and he did that not only last year in Ottawa, but some other places. Was able to step in and provide some quality goaltending. And then, we already have Phoenix Copley, so he's done that for us. He's already, in our building underneath our roof. So we feel all three of those guys in the goaltending chain provide us an opportunity to win.
When it comes to matching a goaltender with the coaching style, you mentioned it at the start there. When it comes to a scouting standpoint, how easy is it to find that information out? Can you tell that from watching a guy's play, or do you have to talk to other goaltending coaches, teammates? Like, do you have to rely on communication with other people in other organizations, or is it something you can see?
It's both. I think there's a lot of communication. Obviously, Bill and I have worked together for a number of years. Um, and then now getting to know Mike and spending time with him and listening to him coach, watching the goalies progress, touching base with him on different guys that I've watched. What do you see? What do I see? And what does Bill see? Having that type of collaboration is extremely important, because we're working together for what's best for the hockey team. And what's best for the hockey team is a goaltender that, can help you win, but a guy that you can maybe squeeze a bit more out of, like Kemp's did this year, as the finalist, had a bounce back year. The work that Mike and Darcy did was incredible. So that was an unbelievable, synergy there. And hopefully we can get the same thing from a guy like Anton. Really try to push his game a little bit. I shouldn't say we; it would be Mike, and work with Anton. But the second part of that you kind of alluded to was the site part. Going and finding a guy that has the tools. Like Anton's a big, uh, athletic, competitive goaltender that can skate. And I think, the things that Buckley looks for, he checks a lot of those boxes. And then you layer in a lot of the things that we heard about him from other coaches along the way, and other, guys that had been close to him, as far as a teammate, a guy that takes the position, seriously. He really cares. He really puts work in, not only at the rink, but takes care of himself away from the rink. A guy that's, not allergic to the weight room. Like, he wants to get in, he wants to work, he wants to be, fit physically, so that he can perform when he's called upon. So I think there's a lot of, things that check the box, not only things that you can see, but things that you can kind of pick up through the communication, not only with your own goaltending department, but out in other NHL rinks, leaning on friends and trusted contacts that you can just kind of, that are close to Anton, that you can see, what am I missing? Is there anything out there that might be a red flag, and nothing really came back that to be worried about in those regards.
Goaltending is such a unique position, not just in hockey, but in all of sports. You need one, you need obviously at one goalie per game, but you're really only allocating two spots on your roster, maybe three, depending on how it goes. And obviously with the e-bug rules, that'll change. But, at any given moment, an NHL team will really only have three, maybe four guys under contract that can play the position. So when it comes to
Mhm.
scouting, what everybody's contract status is, what everybody's age is, where the team's at. At what
Mhm.
point, are you keeping books on every goaltender in the league because you know that at some point the goaltender carousel is kind of a carousel and guys move around, and it's rare that you wind up with a Jonathan Quick who plays however many years it was that he was in LA, with one team for
Mhm.
whatever 15 years or something. So are you just keeping books on every guy, or was there a point last year where somebody said, hey, we need to start thinking about backup goalies, let's think about Anton Forsberg, or somebody said, hey, what do we think about backup goalies, and his name was already in the books and on the list? I mean, how do you prioritize that, because you only have so much time in the day to be looking at goalies?
For sure. Like, I think you have a couple of different meetings with Bill and with some of the other guys, and just say, hey, like, what's the this year's plan, the 2, 3, maybe 5 year plan. How do we kind of incorporate the young guys? Where do we see them, signing and becoming part of the goalie chain? And I think you have a lot of communication and looking at not only what we need now, but what's coming down the pipeline with Hampton and Carter, and even Eric Portillo's in that mix too. So you're watching those guys to see how they progress, but I think you're kind of watching with a wide lens at first, because you never know what can happen. And being in this role for a few years, there's been guys that have been brought up that you wouldn't think would be available or wouldn't be remotely close to um, you know a trade possibility, and all of a sudden you get a phone call from Bill like, hey, have you seen this guy, what do you think about him? And you're like, wow, like, I didn't really think that guy would be someone that they'd be willing to part with or someone to be willing to trade. So I think it's good to have a general information or a general feel on the goaltenders in the NHL for sure, the starters and the backups. And then, knowing what's happening now, knowing who can get the job done today, but also knowing what's coming down the pipeline for other organizations too, knowing kind of who their young backups are, knowing who might be in the American League that, maybe another team has a logjam and they need to get rid of a guy, and he's a guy that we like and we think we can, get more out of, or a guy that might be a better fit here. Like, so I think knowing the starters and the backups obviously are really important. But a guy like Vasilevsky or Bobrovsky or some of these perennial guys that are locked in, maybe like a Jake Ottinger, you're probably not getting too deep down the rabbit hole with their game and how they play and all the underlying stats. But it's good to know how they're playing, and is their game progressing, or they're growing, or they're throwing something new in there that maybe they didn't do last year. That stuff's good to know just for general knowledge. But I think when you really start to nail down the what you need, obviously Kempson played so well down the stretch. You're looking at, okay, we need to give him some support. We need to find a guy that can really, allow Buckley to manage the minutes that both those guys play. And I think, if Ritter had really finished the season strong, I think he would have put himself in a much better position to be re-signed and things like that. But it just didn't work out that way. And I think that they felt that in some of the conversations, that was an area that if they felt that they could upgrade, that they wanted to do it. And Anton was, you know, in a grouping at the very top of our list of saying, hey, if we can get one of these, 3 to 5 guys, I think that this guy would be an upgrade, not only play wise, but we've heard a lot of good things away from the rink as well, as far as a teammate and work ethic in a person. And I don't think you can get enough of that, especially when you have a guy like Eric Portillo and you have a guy like Hampton and Carter coming in. I think that culture piece is huge. When you look at a guy like Copley and you look at a guy like Darcy Kemper, all three. And I don't know Anton because I haven't met him. I haven't seen him in person, but being around Kemper, being around Copper, those guys are consummate pros on and off the ice, and they really set the tone for those young guys that are coming in that want to be pros but don't know how to do it yet.
So the longer that I'm doing this and am in the industry and talking to people, the more I've tried to commit myself to, like, my goal is impossible, but it's to just learn everything there is about the industry and understand how everything works, because it drives me crazy when I find something and I can't wrap my head around it. You know, if I see something and it doesn't make sense to me, it just slowly drives me crazy over time. So I've tried to just make the industry make sense in my head. And the one area that to this day I still just don't get, it's goaltending. And you know, I have mentioned this recently, but like, I found this guy on social media. I can't remember what he calls himself, the goalie guru or something like that. And he's just seems
Mhm.
like an angry guy, and his take seems to be that goaltending is all fake. And you know, the
Mhm.
best goalies that we talk about weren't really that good, and it's all about team and, you know, blah blah blah. But anyway, none of that is important. What I'm getting at is, you know, if you were to describe Anton Forsberg to somebody whose knowledge base of the sport is limited to like what you might find on the EA Sports NHL 26, like, what kind of
Mhm.
goalie is Anton Forsberg? Is he a stand-up goalie? Is he a butterfly goalie? Is he a hybrid goalie? Does he rely on reflexes? Is he one of those positioning guys with ice water in his veins who has a good economy of motion?
Mhm.
All the, you know, the key phrases. Like, what kind of goalie is he?
Yeah, I would start by just describing the physical features for him. Like, he's a big, athletic goaltender that competes and can skate. And I think he has a
I'm sorry.
really great blend.
I'm going to jump in. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off right there because you used a word that to me means something. You said athletic. And that to
Yeah.
me, when I hear people talk about athletic goalies, that means Jonathan Quick type reactions, you know, reflexes, relies on
Mhm.
reflexes and quickness. Is that what you mean when you say athletic goalie?
Not that level. I think you can
Okay.
have that at certain levels, and I think what I would say is that that athleticism blends more kind of in towards the skating and the competitiveness part of his game. Being a big guy, he does have, solid positioning. He does have efficiency of movement, but that doesn't mean that he's a blocky or like a piece of plywood in the net. To me, that athleticism for him is that he can catch pucks, that he can skate, he can move laterally, and he has an element of compete where when things break down in front of him and it's not exactly a play that's easily read, or it's a play that's it's broken and pretty dynamic, he can break out of some of that goalie school teaching and use some of those, I guess, Jonathan Quick like attributes to make some of those dynamic, not teachable type saves. So that would be for me how I would describe him. I think if you look at the EA Sports in terms of like the sliding scales, I think he'd be more of a blend of a goalie. He's not a pure athlete. He's not a pure positional blocky, piece of plywood. He's kind of in the middle. He knows how to use his size. He knows his positioning very well. He has a really solid like as most Swedish goalies do, a very good, solid technical base, an understanding of the position. But he also has that layer that you want to see, kind of more of that Jonathan Quick at times, where he can be athletic and make some of those sprawling, diving saves when he needs to. But I would say that he tends to shade a little bit more towards the size and the positioning, because that's just the natural gifts he has. He's a big, guy. He presents himself well in the net, and I think kind of that Swedish background is he does tend to rely on that positioning and his size to create a lot of saves.
He's 6'3", so he's definitely, you know, a large guy. He's not the world's biggest goalie, but
Yep.
he's definitely not the smallest goalie. You used another word
Hmm.
there. You said competitive. And there's a
Hmm.
couple like just sort of keywords in goalie conversations that over the years I've discovered generally tend to mean, you know, something more. And when I hear competitive or battler or something like that, I think of a goalie
Hmm.
who, if there's a scrum at the front of the goal mouth, he will use his physical size to push forward in order
Hmm.
to see the puck coming in rather than, you know, sink back into the net and, you know, again, rely on
Hmm.
size and positioning. Is that what you mean when you say competitive? Is he the kind of guy who will, you know, enforce his will on the play in order to get better angles and see better, you know, incoming shots?
Yeah, I mean, he's not. I wouldn't say like needlessly aggressive. I think he will use his hands to create space for himself and to hold space for himself. I think he's not shy about standing, at the top of the crease and using that size to force people to move around him. And I think competitiveness for me too is like doing things that aren't, necessarily taught by the goalie coach. Like you've seen a guy like Dominic Hasek, or even like, drop a stick and cover it with his blocker hand, like things that are probably a little more untraditional. Or a guy like Quickie would do the, spin and throw the blocker behind his back. It's not exactly something you're going to go out and say, hey, Bill, I never saw Bill say, hey, Quickie, I'm going to set the pucks up here. I'm going to
Right.
shoot 5 behind your back and try to spin and kick it out. It's just one of those things that, with some instincts and some feel, like you just don't want to quit on a puck. And I've seen him, be aggressive at collecting pucks. I've seen him be aggressive at, battling through some traffic. I've seen him be aggressive, in and around the net with his positioning, and forcing people to work around his position. And I think for me that those are the competitive attributes that you would see kind of come through when he plays his game.
There was, I think it was Stefan Fizet. I could be wrong, but there was a Kings goaltender sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember his mask got knocked off during a game. And rather than
Hmm.
shrink back and, look for a stoppage, he just
Mhm.
he pushed forward and like was out at the top of his crease and
Mhm.
was in position and was looking to stop the shot, and he had the most crazed look on his face, which is why I think it was Stefan Fizet, because
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
loved Stefan Fizet, and I think that was part of the reason I
Mhm.
fell in love with him, was just like, oh wow, this guy does not care, like he is locked
Yeah.
in and wants to stop the puck even if he's not wearing a mask. Like he does not appear to care. It sounds like that's the type of player you're describing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, you have some guys that just, I wouldn't say at all costs, but they just their one thing is on their mind when they're playing the hockey game is you want to have game management, and you want to control rebounds, you want to, keep things tidy for your team. But there's a moment, pardon me, there's a moment in your, you see it in your eyes or in your brain, you realize, okay, I'm gonna have to do something a little crazy here, a little outside the box to make a save. And, those guys are willing to do it. Like, you see, guys like Patrick Waugh and Dominic Hasek, and guys like that just kind of have a little that feel that's, hey, I'm gonna have to do something extraordinary here to try to make a save.
So he's 32 years old, or listed at 32. I haven't done them. Yeah, he's 32
Yeah.
years old. He's 6'3". He comes in. He's on a 2-year contract, if I'm not mistaken, at a time
Mhm.
when the Kings have this window right now where with Kopitar's contract status being what it is, and Doughty and even like Danault and Kempe, like they've got a bunch of guys signed. The team as it currently is constructed is going to be in place for the next year or two at least. And then after that, decisions have to start being made. But for now, like, this is the
Mhm.
team. This is what it's going to look like. They're obviously going for it and they're going to push forward as best they can. What kind of impact can a backup goalie have on the culture of the locker room, the dressing room? Because David Riddick was a very unique personality, and I'll just say it that way, right? Like he I would not say that he put, he didn't set the tone for the room, right? Like, I don't think that his personality led the way on the roster, but he definitely was a personality that you couldn't ignore. Like, he had a very unique
Mhm.
presence. Um,
Mhm.
and you said we don't know what Anton Forsberg is like yet, but what kind of influence can a backup goalie have beyond just the sort of like setting a good example and being a professional?
I think the relationship between the starter and their backup is pretty crucial. A guy that can, help the starter, and a guy that can, be a bit of a lifeline, support line in terms of managing the workload, but also like someone to talk with. And I think with Anton being older, he's been through a couple different teams. He's been around a bunch of different goalies, and I think it's a guy that you can develop a solid, healthy, competitive relationship with. You're both pulling for one another. You're both want the best for one another. And I think that's the type of relationship you hope for between a starter and a backup. And I think he's a guy that's a culture keeper. Like if the culture is in a good spot, I think he's a guy that adds to that kind of that critical mass and keeps the ball rolling in the right direction. And I don't know, this is just stuff that I've heard from people that I trust. So you'd hope that Anton would do something similar here, and he can do something similar here. Like, listen to Kenny, like we're there's some tweaks to be made, but at the end of the day, there was a lot of good that happened during the regular season, and a lot of things that happened. So you don't want to try to mix it up too much. And I think Anton's a guy that would bring the right mix in and keep the culture moving forward and really try to push us to being or keep us really competitive, because it's going to be a really competitive year. We've added pieces, other teams have added pieces, and he's a guy that you hope can not only, or can get the job done on the ice, but also can be one of those glue guys that helps the rest of the team, find enjoyment and find success in a really long regular season.
Well, Matt, I appreciate your time. Thank you. As always, I've said a lot recently that, I think the most underrated aspect of the organization right now is the pro scouting staff. They've done if you really sit down and look at it and look at all of the professional NHL players that have been brought into the LA Kings over the last 5-6 years, there's not many misses on that, on that list. So you guys do an excellent job. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks. And that's all the other guys, Dave Torrey,
Well,
Mark Osborne, Robbie Laird, yeah, Jason Saprika. Those guys have been here for a long time, and you talk about having a good culture and good people. Like they do. Nelson Everson kind of heads up the entire department. So I'm actually really fortunate, really blessed to be around those guys, because I learn a lot from them, and I guess I'm like a good backup. Like I just want to show up and contribute and help the team get better, even if it's with just knowledge on a goalie, or picking up coffees before we hit the game. Like I want to be able to contribute any way that I can to the pro staff, because they're a great bunch of guys. So yeah, and then you said that they get the results. So that's a pretty good formula, I think.
Yep. Thanks again for your time, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.